Probably seen farming is in the news at the moment. You might be fooled into thinking it's all about inheritance tax, but actually, talk to any farmers and there's a lot of other things going on, a lot of other pressures, to the extent that for some people it almost feels, you might say, like Farmageddon. Let's have a look at some of the data, though. And the big story here, or at least one of the big stories here, is the UK has left the EU. And that means a big change in the way that farmers are getting payments. For a long time, farmers have been, to some extent, reliant on basic payments, which have been part of the Common Agricultural Policy. But that's starting to change. This is showing you the DEFRA budget this last few years and the next few years. And what you'll probably notice, OK, so the black bits are showing you the basic farm payments, and you get those just depending on how much land you have. It used to be how much food you were producing, but now it's how much land you have. And the green bits are environmental schemes, so improving hedgerows, improving the quality of the soil and so on. And what you'll notice is, look, the old EU-style farm payments, the black bits, they're being phased out gradually over time, and it's the green bits, the environmental payments, that are growing, and by 2027, that's going to be 100%. And talk to farmers and they'll say, listen, the black bits are the bits that are really encouraging me to grow food. Talk to people in DEFRA and they say, no, listen, if you don't improve the environment, the quality of the soil, you're not going to have food security. On food security, though, it's actually worth looking back a little bit at the story here, the history of the UK and its food security. This line is showing you how much of our food we produce domestically. And back kind of before World War II, it was quite low, about 35%. Then you had all of these campaigns, digging for victory, encouraging farmers to grow more food post-1945, which, look, the line went up as a result of that, up from 35 or so percent to around 60%. Then we joined the EU, and look at that, again, went up to a post-war high. About 80% of our food was grown or reared in this country. But what's interesting is it's come down a bit, certainly, but it's been pretty steady over the last few decades, 62% in the last year, but around that 60% for a long period. And, you know, compare the UK to other countries around the world, well, we're certainly not a winner on this, but actually, you know, more of our food, this is the same thing, by the way, the higher the bars are, the more of your food you're producing domestically. Germany, Switzerland, they're more reliant on imports, mostly from around Europe. Japan, France, they produce more food domestically than the UK. And then look at Canada and Australia, actually producing so much food that they are net exporters there. We'll come back to that issue in a second. But a lot of people saying, listen, because of what's going on at the moment, there might be questions about food security. And it's not just changes in Brexit or post-Brexit payments from the government. It's also what's going on with, you might say, the climate, or indeed certainly the weather. This is showing you how much rain, basically, we have had in the last winter. The darker this is, darker blue the bits are here, the more rain versus the historical average. And it was a really, really wet period. And as a result of how wet it was really difficult to grow wheat in particular. And have a look at what happens to the amount of wheat that we've harvested in this country. That's the red bar there. And we're going back through harvests all the way back to the 1980s. This actually was the second lowest tonnage of wheat, so the second worst harvest, basically, for wheat since 1984. And that's only really because those records began in 1984, so second lowest that we've got on record. So that's not good. On top of that, so the pressures from the weather, pressures from changes post-Brexit, there's also this. Because we're outside the EU, we're now signing trade deals with other countries, and we've signed 2 deals with Australia and New Zealand, and one of the consequences of that is they can import more dairy and beef into the UK. So these lines are showing you imports of dairy and beef from Australia and New Zealand. That's when the trade deals came into force. Look at what happened next. Those lines shot up. So that's food coming into the UK from overseas. It's more competition for domestic farmers. So you can see, put it all together, it's getting tougher. And there's something else that's going on as well. This is kind of a longer-term issue. In fact, this is one of the longest-range charts I've ever produced for Sky, because it goes back to basically almost the Dark Ages here, certainly the medieval period. And this is showing you the amount of wheat that comes out of each hectare of land. So the higher this is, the more kind of productivity you have on each farm. And what you can probably notice is, for most of history, for century after century, it was really quite low. OK, and in the kind of Victorian period, it started to improve a bit. You had better steel, you had better ploughs, better machinery. But the real change came in the second half of the 20th century, basically. You had artificial fertiliser and lots of things pushing up this line, a massive, massive shift in agricultural productivity. And that basically is what a lot of people have lived through. That's, you know, relatively recent memory, is a massive shift in the amount of food you could get out of the land. And here's what's significant and interesting about this. Is there a shift now? And are we seeing that line, which rose so steeply for most of the 20th century, start to slow down? And farming productivity, if that goes lower, that makes it even more difficult for those who are farming the land to try and grow more stuff. So put it all together, all of that, and the Brexit changes and trade changes and what's going on with the weather, and perhaps it's no surprise that people are talking about Farmageddon.